there. You are listening to the Oh Crap Potty Training Podcast, and I am your host, Jamie Glowacki. I am the author of Oh Crap Potty Training and Oh Crap, I Have a Toddler. Had a little brain glitch there. I forgot the name of my own book. So today I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about toy timeouts, and I want to talk about our kids, our toddlers in general, as a whole. So in the first version of my book, so if you have the Oh Crap Potty Training book that is blue, that is the old version that was written in 2009. Simon & Schuster bought it in 2014. That has reigned supreme. And then I got a deal for the 10th anniversary book, and that is yellow. And it's still Oh Crap Potty Training, all the same information. But it is revised, and there's a lot more information. I changed some things. There's more on neurodivergence. I basically rewrote the book. Some of it is intact, and then a lot of it changed. And one of the things that changed is I took out the behavior chapter. So if you have the blue book, you have a chapter on potty training and behavior, because potty training, the act of potty training, sets your child on the path of autonomy, right? Which is like being in charge of their own person. And so what happens is very often potty training will start to elicit behavior that you may have not seen before in your child. Some resistance, some orneriness, some crankiness, some I will do what I want to do, right? And that often collides developmentally with potty training, particularly if you're potty training closer to 3, right? That term three-nager comes into play. So years ago, I had written a chapter on when behavior gets in the way, right? So behavior can get in the way occasionally when you're potty training. And so I, in the book, suggested toy timeouts, particularly if your child is like refusing to go to the potty, or you know they have to go, they're playing with a toy, they're immersed in something, and they're like, nope, don't have to go, or they are resisting going to the potty. And I would suggest a toy timeout. And in the new version, I took that chapter out, and I took that particular advice out because I kind of don't agree with it anymore, which is one of the reasons I think that the opportunity to write and rewrite this book was so heaven sent. And so I love the first version, and it helped so many families, but I am constantly learning. And that's why I have this podcast, and that's why I have a blog and YouTube and Instagram. And I try to always correct myself. And that is one that I'm correcting. And there's a few reasons for that. Number one, first and foremost, is parents that have been in contact with me are taking away the child's lovey as a consequence. So I had always meant it as a way of like, if your child's being distracted, if your child can't focus because they're, immersed in this toy and the toy gets a small timeout, then the child might make the connection of like, oh, okay, I need to pay attention. But it's kind of a punitive action, and definitely not ever meant to take the child's lovey. So if you are taking your child's lovey for any consequence, please don't do that. Then when I say lovey, I mean like their favorite, the one that is a transitional object, comes in the car. It might be a blankie. It might be just a soft taggy thing. Don't ever use that as a consequence. That is a way your child self-regulates with that particular object. And so if you take that away, you make things extremely unsafe. The other thing I'm seeing parents do with the toy timeout in general is misusing it. Yeah, it isn't. It was in the original, I meant it as a way to a direct correlation. Distracted by this goes away. Now go to the potty. It doesn't hold if you do it an hour later. It doesn't hold if they come home with new clothes from daycare and you're like, oh, you peed your pants, I'm taking this away. If you are doing rewards or consequences of any sort, which I don't really recommend when you're potty training any more than you should when your child's learning anything, it does have to be immediate. I do understand that there are times in our kids' lives that we do have to do an external consequence or reward, or we're just so strung out and tired that we can't really reach into our parenting toolbox. So we go for that. I'm going to do this, right? The problem is if if it's not right away, it will never be effective, especially with kids under 6. It has to be fast. It has to be, you did this, I'm doing that, whether it's reward or consequence. And that's why I say even rewarding potty training, which I'm going to talk about the next episode, we really shouldn't be doing it. But if you feel like you really have to, if it's not immediate, it doesn't count. They just don't have that prefrontal cortex. They don't have the expanded thinking to understand, I won't get dessert tomorrow, or stay dry and I'll get a prize. Like, stay dry is not, that we've already talked about that on a podcast, right? That's a secondary product of going to the potty. And that's a real complicated thought, like stay dry to a kid who's always just peed when they want to. But taking something away an hour later doesn't do it. Taking something that's not in conjunction with the thing. So if a child is like hitting at the park and your natural consequence is, we have to leave because your body's a little out of control and we need to go home, right? That is more in keeping. That is directly related to the park, to the behavior at the park, to going home, to let's, settle your body. You can't handle this crowd. That to me is an okay consequence, right? Of course, with any child's behavior, bad or good, we want to get underneath it. And I talk a lot about this in the Oh Crap Parenting podcast, so I won't say a lot here. But remember, potty training is learning. And if your child isn't learning it, we have to look at what we're doing and what we're contributing. But the reason also I don't agree necessarily anymore with the toy timeout is these kids are so sensitive. And I have been saying this, I really started noticing it when we kind of came out of lockdown. So we have to go back to 2020. And so many people now, I find it so interesting, are like, oh, the pandemic, that's so over. And of course, kids are fine. Everything's fine. Like, I literally on Instagram, people will be saying that this didn't affect kids at all, which is crazy. So if your child was in utero, or 1 or 2 or 3 in the pandemic, they have a nervous system that went through something very dramatic. And if they were born or little in 2020, 2021, right, which brings us to usually potty training age around now, right? Those kids were born with a jacked up nervous system. They were born under fight, flight, or freeze conditions. So we have to remember that. And I have, for the last 2 years, all my parenting clients, all my potty training clients, I'm like, these kids are different. I don't know why, but it has to be correlated to the pandemic. It has to be, because I never saw this. I've been doing parenting work for going on 20 years now and doing potty training full time for 15 years now. So it's for me to say I've never seen anything like this. I really mean it. And so these kids are sensitive. I even have been saying, look, I think potty training is taking a little bit longer. I don't think our kids are stupid. I don't think that they lost any capability. I do think we're infantilizing them. I do think as a whole, we're rescuing them. I do think as a whole, we as parents have zero distress tolerance. If our child whimpers, we feel like we need to fix it. I think all of those things are true, but I also think that these kids' nervous systems are jacked up. And it was under the conditions under which they were born and or took part in. And if you don't believe me, please go back to March of 2020 and think of just how scary that was. And I don't care where you ended up on the spectrum of mask wearing or, I don't care where you stand politically. I don't care whether you think the virus was real or not. I know there's like 80 billion theories out there about the pandemic. The reality is when it first hit, we were all very, very scared. It was very scary. So that's what these kids were born with. Now, when a kid's nervous system is dysregulated, that's when you see all this like, whoa, what is happening, this behavior? And I just think these kids need safety before anything else. So I really encourage you to not do timeouts, to not do toy timeouts, because especially with the toy timeout, it can feel so punitive. It can feel so unsafe, right? And so we really want to nurture, not coddle. I am so against coddling. I think we're doing way too much coddling in all the wrong places. I'm not saying coddle. I'm saying be their safe harbor. And remember that potty training is a learning curve. And so we need to nurture learning, not coerce it. Okay. And then that flip side goes for rewards as well, because that is coercive. So I think this gets really tricky because a lot of parents will be like, well, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And so I really, again, I encourage you. There's so much that I talk about this in OCRA parenting that I encourage you to listen to the other podcast. So we talk about things like that all the time, but you have to be their safety, and taking away their lovey is really unsafe. That makes a child kind of go all kinds of berserk. And can you give consequences to make your child comply? Sure, but you're parenting out of fear. And if that, and using fear, utilizing fear, and we don't want to do that. Like that's not my message. If that's what you want to do, please go find another podcast. I have at it, but it's not, I don't parent that way, and I don't want anybody to parent that way, because that's mean. You end up being mean and your child fears you, which isn't the same as respecting you and isn't the same as having a connection with you. And that's how we raise really capable, really authentic people who know how to self-regulate. So there are many tools that you can help your child self-regulate and keep them safe. But far and away, the biggest one is connection with you. Just being connected with your child and being curious. So when something is amiss, I know this is tricky, but when something is amiss, your child's behavior is off. If you could get curious instead of coercive, that is key, right? Because if you want to get underneath the behavior, why is my child acting like this? 99% of bad behavior that isn't, a diagnosis. And by bad behavior, I always put that in quotes because I don't think kids are ever bad. I think it's just undesirable behavior, right? You know what I'm talking about. Is because your child has lost their connection with you. They're not feeling connected to you, and they need more time or more concentrated connection. But also, we want to stay calm and curious. And so you being regulated is key. And I don't know why, but potty training dysregulates so many parents, and they can be the chill, most awesome, great parents. And then potty training, all of a sudden they become like, you have to do this and you have to do this well. And it becomes a measurement of your parenting. And then it becomes a thing that makes you so dysregulated when your child has a hard time learning. And we talk about this on this podcast, right? Parents contacting me that they're devastated that their child isn't getting it. Devastated for a child who is having a glitch in learning. Like that's an exaggerated response for a developmental milestone, right? Devastated would be when your child gets into a car accident. Like, you know what I mean? Or we don't get devastated because your kid didn't learn to ride their bike today. So we're getting dysregulated. That's a dysregulated nervous system that is responding to their child's potty training. So again, and I'm about to do a podcast on being a neutral parent, and that I'm going to be talking even more about this on OCRA parenting. So please go over there if you are stuck. So the number one thing though is connection and safety. And again, a lot of times what happens with potty training is we lose connection with our kids because we kind of switch over to teacher mode. We're like, okay, I'm going to teach my child this. My child's going to be good at this. And so they go from this like baby phase, right? Of like anything goes and you're spending all your time with them and it's fun. And then you go to this learning curve where you're like watching them for a couple of days and it's kind of serious and it's focused on learning. And so there's this real big disconnect from us, the parents, when we do that. So remember, like if you haven't started potty training or if you're in the beginning, who were you as a parent before potty training? Are you still showing up as that same parent, right? We talk about parenting the kid you have, and now I'm kind of turning the mirror to you and saying, well, are you still the same parent? Because I see a switch in parents when they start potty training. I see a disconnect there. And so be regulated yourself, right? And that means you catching your emotions and not exploding with them, not having these really reactive things. Yeah. I think that's the hardest part is parents come to me and they want me to fix their kid. With potty training and with parenting. Now, potty training, there's a lot more kind of, I'm going to say constant things that I could advise, right? There's like actual tips and tricks. But with parenting too, it's like if your child is not complying, right? First of all, I encourage you to not use that word. But if they're not doing what you ask them to do, you're having all kinds of behavioral problems, whether it's potty training or just parenting. Never think it's the child. It's always us. It's always us. Okay. So we want to always say, what am I doing? What am I contributing to this dysregulation? And a parent will come to me and say like, oh, I'm so triggered. I'm so triggered. And I'm like, that's you. That's a you problem. That's not your kid's problem. Your kid's being a kid. Any kid under 3 or 4 is just being a kid. And so if you're getting triggered and you're losing it with your kid, it's really not up to the kid to fix themselves. It's up to you to fix yourself and your reaction. So just notice that. So go into potty training, regulated and calm and curious. And when you start seeing this behavior, try not to resort. Let's say that. Try not to resort to consequences and rewards, particularly at this young age, particularly with this group of kids, this like Gen Alpha. They're just so super sensitive, and we don't want to rupture the relationship. We don't want to put ruptures when they're so young. And when you do have rupture, be very quick to repair. That's number one. We're all going to lose our shit. We're all going to lose our shit. We're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to do things. And please bear in mind, a lot of what I'm saying to you, like my kid's grown now, and I finally feel like I have a handle on parenting. So it's a learning curve. And I also think it's really important when a person has, like I said one thing in the first round of my book, and I've changed my mind on that. And so I think that's important too. So, all right, you guys, as always, I appreciate you listening, and rock on and have a beautiful day.